Hello and welcome to Hacks that Bypass Multi-Factor Authentication and How to Make Your MFA Solution Phishing Resistant. Today's webinar is sponsored by KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I am excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. We'll have team members standing by for any technical issues, although a browser refresh will fix most of those. While we won't have time for a dedicated Q&A session at the end, we'll also forward any questions that you have to the KnowBe4 team to follow up with you afterward. Now, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There's a great PDF from KnowBe4 on 22 social engineering red flags. I highly recommend that one. There's a PDF of the slide deck that you'll be seeing today, and there's a link for a free MFA security assessment from KnowBe4. There's also a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. At the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with that, let's get to today's great session. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our awesome presenter today, Roger Grimes, data-driven defense evangelist at KnowBe4. Every time I listen to a presentation from Roger, he always scares me with details of attacks that are out there in the wild. And he also makes me feel more empowered in identifying and avoiding phishing attempts. So now I'm going to turn things over to Roger.
Thanks everybody for showing up for my hacks that bypass multi-factor authentication and how to make your MFA solution phishing resistant. I've been talking about hacking MFA and bypassing it for years. The most common question, of course, well, Roger, what MFA do you recommend? That's what this talk is about. It's about hacking it, but more importantly, it focuses more than any of my other talks on how to stop from getting MFA that's easily hackable and how you can test it and that sort of stuff. If you haven't met me before, I'm Roger Grimes. I've been doing computer security for 34 years. I've written 13 books and over 1,200 magazine articles on computer security. Probably what's relevant for this talk is I was a pen tester for over 20 years, broke into every place I was hired to break into in an hour or less, except for one place that took me 3 hours. A lot of those hacking projects involve getting around MFA or hacking MFA in particular. And besides hacking MFA, I put in hundreds of MFA projects over the years. I ended up writing a book for Wiley called Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication. But even before that, I wrote a webinar called The Many Ways to Hack MFA Webinar. That was my most popular talk that I've ever done in my career. I wrote a free 12 Ways to Hack 2FA electronic book, ebook for KnowBe4 that you can still download. And I helped develop the multi-factor authentication security assessment tool, which I'm going to cover in 10, 20 minutes again. So I've been doing this a long time. Again, I wrote that book. You can see it upper left-hand corner called Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication, although we got a ton of free stuff. If you go to knowbe4.com/MFA, we just have a ton of stuff. If you don't know about KnowBe4, we're the world's largest integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor. We try to help people not to be phished. And believe it or not, that's still a very relevant issue, even if you're using multi-factor authentication. So today's agenda is to give you a couple examples of hacking MFA, talk about what are characteristics that make MFA so hackable. We'll talk about the U.S. government telling you not to use MFA that is very hackable, although most people still do. I'll tell you about the features you look for in strong MFA, what phishing resistant specifically, what phishing-resistant MFA you should be using, and why a strong human firewall is still your best last line of defense. Along the way, as we show you some hacking demos, you may see some real or simulated phishing attacks that involve trademarks of other third parties. We're only using them to demonstrate phishing attacks, real-world phishing attacks. and all the legalese or whatever. We usually say bad guys don't care about this, and we use brand names to trick you. Anyway, so we're going to show you a brand name or two used in a simulated phishing attack. But this is what I want to tell you also. Even though every MFA can be hacked, people should use phishing-resistant MFA. And let me say, underscore that, phishing-resistant MFA whenever they can to protect valuable systems and data. I like MFA. It's just oversold as protective value to a lot of people. I hear a lot of people, even people I admire and respect, say, oh, MFA stops 99% of hacking. It does not. It never will. That's a bunch of baloney. But MFA is still good. You should still use MFA, phishing-resistant MFA if you can, when and wherever you can to protect valuable data and systems. That's what I like to tell people. But anything can be hacked. Any MFA solution can be hacked. I can hack any MFA solution. You give me at least a handful of different ways, most of them more than 10 ways. I have a book, in the book Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication by Wiley. It shows over 50 different ways. It's not like me. I didn't invent most of the ways to hack them. There are a few that are unique, ones that I invented, but a lot of people can hack MFA, not just me. But some MFA solutions are far more resilient than others, and those are the ones that you should be requesting and using if possible. But we're going to start off with the most common way to hack bypass MFA that applies to 95% of all MFA, and you should not be using, when possible, MFA that's this easy to hack. Unfortunately, again, 95% of MFA falls to this trick, and it's known as network session hijacking. It requires that the attacker is able to establish a man-in-the-middle platform. Usually what happens, the attacker sends the potential victim an email that the victim thinks, it's a phishing email, but the victim thinks it's coming from some real vendor or brand that they interact with. And the email is asking them to click to do something, to log in, to verify something. And what the victim doesn't realize is that the link they're clicking on is not going to the real vendor. It's going to some other site, some lookalike, URL that maybe has the vendor's name in it or something, but isn't the real site. And what that does is it takes them to what's called a man-in-the-middle proxy website, and then that site, the fake site, then forwards anything the user does to the real website the attacker thought that the victim thought they were going to in the first place, and brings back the real website to the victim. So the man-in-the-middle proxy website sitting between the victim and the legitimate website, and everything the victim types in, like their login name, password, their MFA credentials, can be captured. Anything that's on the website, so any confidential data, any information the website sends back to the victim, they can capture, the hacker can capture. But more importantly, they can capture something called the access control token cookie. Whenever you log into any application, or especially a website, they're going to send back this application session control, the application access control token, which on a website is in the form of this text-based cookie. Essentially, it's just this text file that says that the user has been authenticated, and then anybody that has possession of that access control token cookie will be seen as the real user. And these man-in-the-middle websites oftentimes will allow the user to log in with, or they don't care whether you have MFA or not, they'll just allow you to log into the website, and then they will capture the resulting successful access control token that's being sent to the user. The man-in-the-middle website will capture that and then cut the legitimate user session, and then they'll use the cookie and take over the session as the end user. Again, how it usually happens, the bad guy has convinced the victim to visit this rogue lookalike website that's really a fake website called a man-in-the-middle proxy website. It then connects them to the real website, and then the man-in-the-middle proxy website can see anything between the user and the real website, including this access control token plus password or any numbers they type in because of MFA. Kevin Mitnick, our chief hacking officer, and longtime notorious hacker, but chief hacking officer for KnowBe4, he has this video that I think shows it better than any other video I've ever seen. I'm going to show you a cut down version that's only about 3 minutes. I think Kevin's original version is like 7-8 minutes. We just don't have time for that today. But if you want to see the whole video, you can go to this blog link at the bottom of this page, click there, follow the link to the YouTube video, and you'll see the whole 7 minutes. But I'm going to show you a shortened version. I think anyone, if you've seen it before in one of my MFA sessions, the reason why I use it again is it is the most common attack, and it is the one you need to be worried about the most. And if you haven't seen it before, usually most people are like, I didn't realize how easy it was to hack around MFA. But here we go.
So here we are on an inbox, a regular looking inbox, and one of those emails has a phishing email. Kevin's going to click on it. It looks like just a normal email from somebody saying, hey, let's connect on LinkedIn. But this is a phishing email, and if the victim was looking at the URL, they'd see that it's LLinked.com, not LinkedIn.com. But a lot of people would miss that, think it was from LinkedIn, and then clicked on the button. When they clicked on the button, if they didn't realize it was taken to the wrong place, if you look up in the top hand side there, it's LLinked, not LinkedIn. But really what this is a man-in-the-middle website that's capturing when the victim types in their login name and password. And even LinkedIn is going to prompt the victim to input their MFA credentials after they put in their login name and password. But really what the victim is connected to is a man-in-the-middle website that is capturing all that information, the login name, the password, and the multi-factor authentication code that they type on in here. So the person gets sent the code, they type it in, they think they're putting it to the real website, but really it's a fake website that's capturing it. And if you look behind the scenes there, the hacker, using their hacking tool behind the scenes, has captured the login name and password. The victim is actually in on the real website right now. It has passed them through to the real website. But this is what the hacker captures. You can see email address, password, and what's called the access control token cookie. They could have, if they wanted to, captured that 4 or 6 digit code that they typed on in, but they really, in this particular case, don't even need it because they have the website's cookie. Every time someone logs in successfully, whether it includes MFA or not, the website will send back a cookie that basically says, hey, you've been approved, you authenticated. The hacker can capture that and then paste it into their browser. So here is an example. Kevin is going into his browser, going to the LinkedIn real website. He's not even going to try to log in as the user with their login name and password. He's simply going to inject the stolen cookie into his browser session. He's doing it right here. He's going to open up the admin console, the developer console, copy that stolen cookie into his browser, and simply refresh his browser, and he will be logged in as the victim.
So pretty amazing.
And there is the attacker on the real website and as the victim. And this sort of attack would work against probably 90–95% of multi-factor authentication today.
So pretty amazing attack if you've not seen it before. Kevin's using a software product called Evil Jinx that's been around for about 10 years, but there are literally dozens, if not 100 products that will do the same thing. And it all comes from being that, if you can trick a user into clicking on a rogue bogus link, probably 90–95% of MFA will fall for that. Not all MFA, like FIDO-based MFA, which we'll talk about more in a little while, will not fall for that type of attack. But any MFA that can fall for that man-in-the-middle proxy website, you shouldn't use because it just makes stealing and getting around MFA as easy as getting around a password, and you just should not. And again, this has been used in real life. Here's a report from July 2022 where Microsoft's saying that over 10,000 of their customers were hacked using this exact same site. They actually give it a different name. They call it adversary in the middle. I don't know why they just made that up. It's been known as man in the middle for decades. But they tell you right in the text there, has been used, skip the authentication process, even if the user had enabled MFA, hijacks user sign-in session, skips the authentication process, even if the user had enabled MFA. It's a very common type of attack. Here's another report from a couple of years ago where someone, cryptocurrency guy lost all of his cryptocurrency because he got a fake email that took him to a fake Binance website. Binance is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, kind of like Coinbase here in the United States. And you can see here, he said, hey, I was taken to this fake Binance site that stole my login credentials. He was using Google Authenticator, and they were able to steal his 6-digit code from Google Authenticator and go log into the real website and steal his money. Here are some other news reports again from a couple of years ago, but I like to use them because just it's attacks this year, last year, year before. In this case, Iranian phishers bypassed 2FA protections offered by Yahoo Mail and Gmail. It says here that if you entered in passwords into the fake Gmail or Yahoo security page, they would almost simultaneously enter those credentials into the real login page. In the event that the target's accounts were protected by 2FA, two-factor authentication, the attackers would redirect targets to a new page that requested the one-time password and did the same thing. And using this, they actually stole what they think are millions of accounts back in that day. Even most malware, most mobile malware today that's called password stealing or bank Trojan, like in this example, this example is a very common mobile malware program called EventBot. If you look at that, it can read your SMS messages, and still those SMS-based MFA is probably the most common form of MFA on the internet, and they can capture that, read your SMS messages, and use it to bypass your two-factor authentication. So it's just rampant. It's everywhere. It always has been. The first time I wrote about this type of attack was in 1989, and here it is, 2020 or whatever, and it's still being used. And let me say, it's not lost on the U.S. government. The U.S. government has said since 2017, and again in 2021 and 2022, not to use these kind of phishable forms of MFA. And I've got red lines through the screen here, but you can see that in the Digital Identity Guidelines. This is published in 2017, Digital Identity Guidelines. That's NIST Special Publication 800-63. The United States government said do not use MFA that relies upon your phone or phone number as part of its authentication, and that includes SMS-based or voice call-based MFA. And yet, SMS-based MFA is still one of the most common types of MFA, even though the United States government has been saying for over 5 years not to use it. And then President Biden in 2021 said that you should not, if you look at this, you should not use MFA that failed to resist phishing, such as protocols that registered phone numbers for SMS or voice calls, but then they also added or supply one-time codes or receive push notification. That sentence right there describes 90-95% of MFA used today, and the U.S. government's been saying now, going on years, not to use that type of MFA. And they said it again, just in case we need to clarify, they said it again in 2020, January 2022. They said you should use phishing-resistant MFA. And it's unfortunate that most MFA is not phishing resistant. And I gave you some examples. I'm going to give you some more examples in just a minute. But the phone-based stuff, the reason why the U.S. government says not to use it is that it's fairly easy for a hacker to get around your phone-based or MSA-based, MFA. Probably the most common way is what's called a SIM swap attack. And just know, in this case, an attacker can get your phone number switched to their burner phone, their cell phone. They can literally call up your phone company, fake being you, or they can do it through, there's some other ways they can do it that don't involve your phone company, but it involves other phone companies, where they can get your phone number switched to their phone. And then they will get your phone number based MFA, SMS, or otherwise sent to you. So they'll find out like, oh, can Roger's bank account, oh, I see Roger's bank account password can be reset, and it will send them an SMS message with a code as part of the reset. So then they'll get my phone number switched to their phone, and then have the, have the code done, and have the code sent to them. SIM swap attacks have been around for at least a decade, and they're getting more popular, not less popular, and been used to steal, billions of dollars now. Deep fake voice calls. So, if someone could do a deep fake to either authenticate to voice-based authentication, or more importantly, they could call you and give you a number or give you a website to go to, and if you follow that instruction, it could then harm your interest. The man-in-the-middle proxy attacks that I just covered and that Kevin Mitnick showed you in that demo, they still work with most phone-based MFA. And then there's SMS rogue recovery hack that I'm going to show you in just a minute. But just to be clear, if you have a phone app, like my Bank of America or Citibank or Wells Fargo bank site also has their own specialized phone app. and that phone app is typically not tied to your phone number. You have to log in separately. You have to put a login name and password, your bank's login name and password, maybe MFA. Those are actually fairly secure and a lot harder to hack, a lot harder to phish. So I like phone apps that are not tied to your phone number. But really, another example how easy it is to get around people's SMS-based MFA is that the major problem with SMS, short messaging service messaging, is that you don't know somebody that's messaging you who they really are. They can fake the phone number. They can claim to be anybody. Like if I know you got a Gmail account, I could send you a message, again, from any phone number you don't know, or I could fake the phone number, so it comes from what you think is a real phone number, but it's really easy to fake phone numbers on today's public switch telephone network, and send you a message through SMS saying, hey, we're from Google Security. We've detected a rogue sign-in to your Gmail account. In order to determine the legitimate login, we're going to send a verification code to your previously registered phone number from another Google support number. Please retype the sent verification code in response to this message, or your account will be permanently locked. Then the hacker just goes to Google Gmail, puts in your email address, tells Gmail they forgot your password. They didn't forget your password. They didn't know your password. But then Google will say, hey, do you want to try the old password? And you can say, no, I want to try another way. And you can choose SMS. And that will send this SMS reset verification code. That's a real Google verification code message right there. And if they are tricked into providing that to the attacker, it's game over. And let me say, you can make up any number of ways to do this exact trick. Here's some more examples that I just came up with out of my head. But as long as I know, I'd have to usually know your login name, which is usually your email address, and that that you have an account with somebody that allows an SMS reset. I can then many times go fool you. Like, maybe I can send you a message claiming to be from your water, company. Hey, county emergency message. There's been a large water main break has been detected near your primary place of residence. Do not drink or use water from the tap until further notice. We apologize for the inconvenience. Do you wish to be enrolled for proactive status updates about this event? Reply yes or no. I mean, who doesn't want to know when it's safe to drink water again? So you say yes, and they're like, well, thank you. We're going to reply. We're going to send you a confirmation code. Just, reply with that code. And what the person doesn't know is the attacker is going to the victim's, bank account, stock account, Gmail account, Office 365 account, sending them this code. And then if they get tricked, it's game over. They got the code, they reset the account. They usually take it over, change the password, enable multi-factor authentication on that account, and the person has a hard time ever getting it back. This is done. I don't know if it's counted, but I would guess thousands or many thousands of times a day. And I've had friends tell me, Roger, you can't socially engineer me. When I do this SMS trick, that county water main break one, it has always fooled them, always. And the problem again is you don't know who you're getting and who the SMS message is really from. Anybody can claim to be anybody. I used to be a big fan of push-based MFA. Push-based MFA is like you usually get this message on your phone. It could be your laptop or desktop. But typically, you get this message on your phone when you're logging in that says, hey, is this you, Roger Grimes, logging in from Miami, Florida? If so, do you want to approve this login? And I got to say that I used to be a really big fan of that, but it turns out that people will approve logins that they're actually not actively doing. We'll talk more about that. But so I used to be a fan of push-based MFA, but I'm not. And let me say, the U.S. government again in 2022 said they're not a fan of it. And you shouldn't be using it. But the problem is that somewhere around 30% of users will approve a login that they're not involved in. It's crazy. I even consulted with a company that lost tens of millions of dollars to ransomware, and the person involved in approving the rogue logins was a senior vice president. And we asked him, why did you approve over 80 logins from Russia? Like literally the push-based message said it was coming from a city in Russia. And, why did you approve that, allow the ransomware people in? He said, listen, I was just doing what you told me to do, which was when I get this message, you say yes. And you're like, no, I don't think IT told you to blindly approve any random login. Either that person wasn't explicitly told that, hey, if you're not logging in, say no and report it to IT because it's someone's trying to hack your account, or they just didn't hear it. Either way, they didn't get appropriate training and testing to verify they knew what they say. And let me say, it's not that one person. It's about 30% of people will approve logins. Matter of fact, some penetration testers that I know that work for Mandiant and some other companies said that they love when they have a penetration testing against a company with push-based authentication, because they know they can just do a bunch of them and someone's going to approve it. They said it's like walking up to a New York City building, hitting all the buttons for access to the building. Somebody in that building is waiting for a pizza or flowers to be delivered or something like that, and will always just blindly push the accept button. Same thing with push-based authentication. So I'm no longer as big of a fan as I used to be. So what features should you look for in a strong MFA solution? Well, first of all, just know there's lots of different ways to hack MFA. I've got, if you really care, and I'm not going to go into it here. This is a figure from my Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication book. But here are all the different components that are involved in most multi-factor authentication solutions. And hackers can attack it, the software, the hardware, the user, the authentication protocol, the network, or whatever. The vast majority of hacks are against the user, social engineering against the user. That's the biggest one. But, you can hack multi-factor authentication a bunch of different ways. If you really want to get into identity management, this is really kind of how the pathway goes, where somebody registers to get an identity and then they submit it to a website as a claimant or a subscriber, and there's a verifier that verifies the authentication, and there's access control and blah 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 blah. This is kind of technicalese for, hey, there's a lot of different interactions going on with any authentication transaction. And hackers will many times look for vulnerabilities between these different parts. Again, oftentimes focusing on the end user, but many times, like when we're hacking around a multi-factor authentication solution, we're not really even hacking the technology. We're just hacking the user so that the technology can't get in our way. Although sometimes you can actually hack the technology. Every MFA solution has tons of bugs. Matter of fact, here are the different, 12, 13 different ways that you can hack anything, but in particular for this case are, multi-factor authentication solutions, social engineering being the biggest and most popular method. You can try to also eavesdrop on secrets. That's what man-in-the-middle attacks do, right? They're eavesdropping on the, the MFA solution or the MFA one-time code, or they're grabbing that access control token. They could exploit a programming bug. All MFA has software or firmware involved in it, and all of it has bugs. And it can always be, every solution has bugs in it. And if you go look, if you put in MFA bugs, you're going to see a ton of stuff that might scare you. Many times there's weak verification between the different components that I just talked about, and that's because the developers they thought that every time they get passed information, well, we have to trust that information is valid. You don't, and you shouldn't. So that leads to hacks all the time. Many times MFA can be bypassed because you can recover around it. Like most popular MFA today, especially from Microsoft and Google and all that stuff, they realize that people lose their MFA keys, or they lose their phone, and there has to be some other alternative method to get the person logged on in, or to reset the password, or to get people, if they get new phones, they have to get a new, instance of their, Google Authenticator app or whatever on it. And hackers will abuse that and act like the end user. And it turns out that most of the alternate recovery bypass methods aren't that hard to hack. A lot of the MFA solutions have weak default configuration settings. Like they could be stronger. They could block more attacks. Like there's a Duo. I like Duo. Let me say I like Duo, Cisco's Duo, and I can even go, and I will verbally tell I got stock in Cisco and Duo, but like some of their default options are fail open. So instead of something happening in the solution, the authentication fails closed and disallows the authentication, the default setting is fail open. So if some component in the Duo authentication on a server fails, it will just let people through, whereas if the Duo MFA was not there. And let me say, again, I understand why Duo did that. And there's even an option where you can enable fail close, right? But the default option is fail open, and most people either don't know what it is or they just accept the defaults, and so it fails open. But I don't even fault Duo for doing that, because if they failed closed, they're probably going to get more calls, more help desk calls for things that weren't working and causing problems. And they say, hey, if you don't want it to fail open, just do this click mark and make it fail closed. But that leads to issues. Or maybe there's an MFA that allows you to type in the 4-digit code or 6-digit code. And a lot of people don't know, sometimes you can guess millions of times and they don't lock you out. If you had a password, it would lock you out, after you tried to type in a password incorrectly, 3 times or 6 times. But for some reason, a lot of MFA solutions will allow people to type in that 4 or 6-digit code hundreds, thousands, millions of times without being locked out. It's really kind of, crazy. And there's other, lots of other things hackers can do. They can malform protocols, web protocols, and network protocols that get around the MFA. They can attack the MFA solution using DNS or Active Directory. I've got lots of examples of that in my book. And then physical attacks, where they can literally, many times, they can take your MFA, if it's a physical MFA solution, they can take it to an electron microscope or take it apart, analyze it, and find the secrets on that MFA token. And there's a whole subclass of people, hundreds, if not thousands of people, that can take your MFA token and find the secret on it. Because once you know how to exploit, at the chip or the firmware level, it's not that hard. There's lots of YouTube videos if you want to see where people are literally taking smart cards apart and tokens and cryptocurrency protectors, and it takes them a couple of hours, but not longer than that, and they're able to break into it. And you've got to assume that every nation state has many attackers that can do physical attacks against MFA. So there's all these different ways you can hack MFA. If you're interested, like how I could hack a particular MFA solution, again, I've hacked them all. We have a tool at KnowBe4 called the Multi-Factor Authentication Security Assessment Tool. And this tool was made a couple of years ago, and it could possibly I could add some more scenarios in there, but it's a pretty good. If you're like, Roger, how could you hack this thing? Either your current MFA or an MFA solution that you're getting ready to consider. Go to that tool, download the Multi-Factor Authentication Security Assessment. It's really just a query. It just asks you a bunch of questions, between about 12 to 20 questions, because I have to know, what type of MFA you're using, and does it have an alternate recovery method, and et cetera. And but you run that quiz, you say yes or no, and at the end it will send you a report telling you how my brain, at least a couple of years ago, how my brain could hack your particular MFA solution. So if you're interested how I could hack a particular solution, go to that. That tool is, it's just a bunch of questions, and will spit out a really good report that I think will at least generate some ideas and discussion. But if you want to know, how can I hack this? That's a really good tool to run. My general advice, though, is just to avoid any MFA solution that can be easily socially engineered or man-in-the-middle around, which, if you remember that early video, Kevin Mitnick video, where he's doing the fake LinkedIn, most MFA, 95% can fall susceptible to that same problem. And I think at a bare minimum, any MFA you use should not be susceptible to that type of trick, to the man-in-the-middle proxy attack. And that's because that means that your MFA can be bypassed as simple as a phishing email. The whole reason you're moving from passwords to MFA is to stop phishing. That's the number one reason why you're going to MFA. And it takes time and money and energy and resources and retraining and help desk staff and all that stuff to move to MFA. And if it doesn't prevent the most common reason why you went to MFA, well, that was a lot of work and expense for nothing. So at the very least, if you don't remember anything out of this, ask yourself, can your MFA solution fall victim to that simple man-in-the-middle proxy attack? And if it does, well, you want to try to use something else. Unfortunately, most MFA is easily susceptible, but I'm going to tell you what MFA is not susceptible to that sort of solution. But the bare minimum bar, if you want to ask me, Roger, what do you think about this solution, like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or whatever it happens to be, the first thing I say in my head is, could that solution fall victim to the man-in-the-middle proxy attack? And if it could, I don't like it. I want you to use something else. Let me say, many times you don't have, you don't have the ability just to go to something else. You're already into a solution, or the vendor or the application tells you have to use a particular solution. I think it's kind of funny. Years ago, we're like, we're going to go to a passwordless society. Today, all of us have more passwords than ever before, and we usually have multiple MFAs. I have a different MFA to log into my work laptop, a different MFA I use when I'm physically at work trying to get in the building, a different MFA for my bank, a different MFA for my stock account, a different MFA when I'm going to LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. I now have many, many MFAs, and many of them are susceptible to man-in-the-middle proxy attacks, but I can't tell a vendor to go choose a different option. They may be using one of the options I don't like, but that's what I have to use. And I guess it's, people say, well, should you use any MFA, even if it's phishable? I guess, but if you have the ability to choose something better, choose and use something better, demand. And let me say, many times it's just small features, and we're going to discuss some of them that can be added to these different MFA solutions to make them less hackable. I think that all MFA should contain enough features and information to help users defeat common attacks against that type of MFA. Also, it should be MFA and not 1FA. So a lot of people, like if you use your fingerprint to log into your phone, that's single factor 1FA. If you plug in a USB key and push a button and that's all you do, and you don't have to put in a password or a PIN, that's 1FA. And I have some people, no, it's 2FA. The first factor is that you actually hold the you hold the token. That's your multi-factor, and then pushing the button is the second factor. It isn't, because anyone that pushes that, if I can take your token and plug it in and push the button, so can a thief. That isn't, they're doing something. It's a factor. It's just not an authentication factor. If anybody can push that button and then log in as you, it's single factor. It's not multi-factor. And let me say, I like this solution right here when it's in FIDO mode and it requires a PIN or a password. It's a very strong solution, not easily phishable. But make sure that just because it looks like like everybody thinks if you do biometrics that it's multi-factor authentication, but if all you're doing is using the biometric attribute to log on in, it's really single factor. It's not multi-factor. And there is a benefit to using multi-factor authentication in that it is more difficult for a hacker to steal and reuse multiple authentication factors than a single authentication factor. And that's why we like MFA. And people even say, well, Roger, what do you think about passwordless login? And I'll say it again, I like it if it's multi-factor and not single factor. A lot of passwordless solutions are single factor, and I don't like them as much. I don't like any vendor that tries to oversell the protection. There's a lot of vendors and people saying, oh, MFA prevents 99% of attacks. I've yet to meet an MFA vendor that says MFA defeats 99% of attacks where they didn't have a weak option. It's MFA, I don't know what MFA blocks. Like, there's no statistics on what amount of hacking that MFA prevents. There are some limited studies about limited scenarios over limited periods of time. Like, oh, it blocked 100% or 99%. That's great. Those are proof of concept projects and stuff. There is no MFA that is going to stop 100% of hacking. Like unpatched software gets by all MFA. That's like 20 to 40% of attacks involve unpatched software. MFA is not going to stop any of those attacks. Trusted Insider, MFA is not going to stop. Buffer overflows, MFA is not going to stop. And the MFA solution itself has many types of hacking that can be done against it. It is not, so any vendor or anybody trying to tell you that MFA stops 99% of attacks, they're just wrong, and I would avoid them. And if they say they're unhackable, that's the other side. It'd be, oh, you can't hack our solution. Anybody that knows what they're doing can hack your solution. Stop saying it's unhackable. If any vendor tells me that MFA stops 99% of attacks or that it's unhackable, I just personally avoid, would not recommend. And all the ones I personally know trying to say that MFA stops 99% of attacks, let me say, most of them don't say that anymore, but the ones that are still saying it, I don't like, I don't trust, and I tell you to go to something different. The good MFA, they don't say that it prevents 99% of attacks. I mean, what's interesting, MFA does stop the vast majority of attacks. Isn't that good enough? Like that, to say that if I use MFA, and again, there's no stats, I think MFA, non-phishable MFA, is going to stop 15 to 30% of attacks. That's huge. There's probably no other, maybe one other, not hovering over links and analyzing them before you click on them. That probably stops more attacks. But MFA stops a wide variety of attacks. And for that alone, everybody should use non-phishable MFA. A lot of the problems are the vendors are not securely developing their solutions. Every developer, every vendor's developer should practice secure development lifecycle, meaning that they learn about how to make a more secure solution. They end up with less bugs. They end up with a more secure product. They're using tools that are more secure and tools that have more default security options. Any vendor that does MFA, I would ask, do you do secure development lifecycle or whatever they kind of call it, secure code development? And if the vendor says, I don't know what you're talking about, go to another vendor. I want a vendor that knows what SDL means and they practice it. Your MFA vendor should have in-house code reviews and penetration testing teams that try to break into their products. They should also hire external pen testers, because no matter how good your internal team is, there's always better external pen testers that can find stuff the internal team didn't find. And they should switch up the external pen testing teams every couple of years just to get somebody to take a new look at it. The MFA vendor should participate in bug bounties where they actually pay people to report bugs. Let me say, they should respond to anybody reporting a bug. There's lots of news stories where somebody, a pen tester, a person with a good heart, was reporting a bug to an MFA vendor, and the MFA vendor went, that's not a bug, or that's, as designed. And then months and months later, after the media got a hold of it, okay, it is a bug, we'll fix it. I want vendors that pay people, a legitimate amount of money, whether it's, 100 or thousands or 10,000 bucks or whatever, to report bugs. Because, and there's a lot of really good bug bounty programs out there. I think every vendor, MFA or not, should participate in bug bounties and pay people for bugs. And don't just blow people off and let, a lot of vendors would tell you that the vast majority of, bug reports really aren't bugs, and they don't work, and they can't, they're just not good reports. But if it is a good bug that can be recreated, don't blow off the reporter, because that just causes problems and animosity. And the bug reporter may report it and go give it to some other nation state and make a lot more money than you're giving them. But I also think, and only one vendor does this today, I'll tell you who it is in a little bit, but I think all MFA vendors should educate buyers and users about the common threats that are used against their products and how to defend. Too many vendors are like, our solution is unhackable, it stops all hacking. It's not true, it never will be true. And I think every vendor should have a sheet that goes, hey, these are the sort of attacks we've seen that work against our solution, like push-based MFA. We found out that some users will just approve it even when they're not logging in. So make sure to educate your end users of push-based authentication that they need to make sure they're actually logging in. And if they're not logging in, then they should report it as a hacking attempt to IT or the help desk or whoever. I mean, you have to, you would think, I guess we're in IT security, and we think everybody would know that if you get a login notice on your push-based authentication and it's not you, that somebody would report it. But it's amazing how many people just approve it. And, it was amazing, like some of these push-based authentication hacks, the hackers will send like 100 login attempts to a particular victim. And the victim's like, no, it's not me. And eventually they just want to sleep. It's 3 a.m. Yes, they just think it's some batch file going off or something. Eventually they just say yes. You need to teach people never say yes unless it's you actively logging in with that session. And vendors should educate. And I get it. Vendors are trying to sell a product. They're trying to get you to sell it. They want you to think it's as secure as possible. And I get that. but they should take the time to educate everyone involved about the common types of attacks and what education you need to give to people so that they're not surprised. Because a lot of people, like today, I'm sure a lot of people were surprised about how easy it was to get around multi-factor authentication in the first example, or any of the examples I gave. These are not new attacks. They've been around for decades in many cases, and it's just that we have to educate people about them. If you're interested in what is the exact MFA that I think you should be using, I literally have a LinkedIn list that I update whenever I get a new report of what I call my list of good, strong MFA. You know what that means? It's MFA that avoids being easily phished. That's my litmus test. Is the MFA susceptible to the man-in-the-middle proxy attack? And if not, it ends up on my list of good, strong MFA. So if you want to know exactly what MFA that I like, and let me say, it's really only a list of about 10 things, but it actually covers dozens and dozens of MFA solutions. And we're going to cover them in just a minute. So it's just that most people don't use those. They should, but they don't. And I've got some other related articles that kind of cover the stuff I've already covered today. But these are good links to look at or use when you're trying to convince somebody else. And here's some of the solutions I like. FIDO, Fast Identity Online MFA Solutions. This is a framework, an alliance that was started by Google and Microsoft and others. And FIDO is specifically created to prevent man-in-the-middle proxy attacks. It stops a lot of other attacks. Any solution, any MFA solution that says it's FIDO enabled, you should use. It's a good thing to use. And let me say that I have like this YubiKey, which is really popular. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but these little USB keys that you plug in, they can be configured and enabled as both FIDO and non-FIDO. And I think the default is non-FIDO. But it's just as easy or hard to enable a YubiKey as FIDO enabled. But if you enable it with a FIDO enabled feature part, it is not susceptible to man-in-the-middle proxy attacks. And for that reason, you should use it whenever you can. And let me say, the other thing I like about FIDO is they're the only MFA vendor, they're not a vendor, they're a framework and consortium, that actually gives you their security threat model. They actually tell you all the different types of attacks that they can think of that could attack a FIDO key, how the FIDO key stops it, and then even some leftover risk and how you could offset those risks. I think every vendor should have a publicly available threat model, but they're the only ones I know of. Although let me also say, FIDO has a 1FA option. I don't like the 1FA options. I like the multi-factor authentication options. Anything that says it's NIST 800-63 AAL3 is phishing resistant. So again, NIST 800-63 came out. It's called the Digital Identity Guidelines, and there's different levels of assurance and security in different types of identity models. And the ultimate solution was known as AAL3, Assurance Level 3. And that, if you look at the very bottom there, in order for an authentication solution, including MFA, to become certified as AAL3, the authentication must spell in the presence of a man-in-the-middle attack. So any solution that is AAL3 is going to be phishing resistant. You'll see like this Yubico here says that it's FIPS 142 40-2 validated AAL3 of the NIST SP 800-6. That's what you want to see. I got to tell you, when I was researching what other authentication solutions had AAL3, I was surprised by how many vendors said they had it. And when I read the fine line terms or whatever, they didn't have it. They only had AAL2. Or they said eventually we'll support it, or we could support. So just be aware of that. Many of the solutions that said they were AAL3 were not. So make sure you read the fine print. That was a little bit sad to see that. Let me say, it came from some major vendors that we all love, know, and trust. So make sure that the fine terms, the lines, say that it really is AAL3. Smart cards. When I first got into multi-factor authentication. It was a lot of smart cards. There's smart cards and RSA secure ID cards. Smart cards are not, they're not as popular anymore. They're dying. And now we're into virtual smart cards and other things. Smart cards, they are usually AAL3. Most of them are, and they're usually very tough to phish. And it really comes down to, does the person that issues the smart card, do they verify the person's identity in a good way? And most do. Let me say, even in America, there's this really common thing known as the military CAC card. CAC stands for Common Access Card. You basically have to give your blood and your DNA to get one of these cards. They're just smart cards with really high identity assurance, and that you are who you say you are before you get one of those cards. So any solution that prevents man-in-the-middle phishing, that also is very adamant about identity attestation, is going to be a pretty good solution. So, smart cards, CAC cards, that sort of stuff, they're usually pretty good. The Google Advanced Protection Program is FIDO enabled. So it's interesting. You can buy a Google security key or a Google Titan key, and if they don't participate in the Advanced Protection Program, it's not necessarily phishing resistant, although they could be. When you enable a device, and it doesn't have to be a Google device, it can be almost any FIDO-enabled security key. When you enroll it in the Google Advanced Protection Program, that means that it has to be FIDO-enabled, so that gives you phishing resistance. And it has other things, like it does secure downloads, it scans the downloads, it does things like that. The only problem, of course, is like many of these, the most popular MFA solutions probably don't work with 2% of the world's websites and services. The Google Authenticator, or the Google Advanced Protection Program you use with the Google Titan key or whatever, it only works with Google sites and applications, and then selected third-party products like Apple Mail, Mozilla, Thunderbird. There are some things it works with. It doesn't work, with most of your Windows applications. No, it doesn't work with most websites. No, it could, but it doesn't. So that's, it's a good thing. But so if you've got Google Authenticator alone, I'm not a big fan of it, but anything that's enrolled in the Google Advanced Protection Program, I am. So Google does have good solutions. And then there's other vendors, and I can't spend a long time talking about these other various vendors, just to let you know that there's, like FIDO. I'm like, oh, FIDO is a big deal, or AAL level 3, it's a big deal, and smart cards. There's lots of other MFA and passwordless vendors out there. I've got a handful in this slide and the next that I've talked to the vendor and feel confident in that they offer phishing resistant solutions, like Beyond Identity. They work with a bunch of different multi-factor authentication things, including the FIDO, or they can also do non-FIDO, but all of their solutions are non-phishable. And the way that Beyond Identity treats the token, and there's usually a digital certificate involved, although it's not a PKI certificate, but the way that their product handles the authentication thing, it's not phishable. If you go to a man-in-the-middle proxy website, that MFA solution just doesn't work. You usually with these, a lot of these are FIDO enabled, and FIDO, if you go to a FIDO enabled solution and you go to the man-in-the-middle website, it just doesn't pop up. It doesn't recognize the website to pop up and ask you for a login name and a password or a PIN or for your device. Other ones, it'll warn you that there's something going on. So just know that there are these solutions. Again, I have them all at my LinkedIn website that I showed you before, and I list them. And if a vendor comes up to me, sees this talk, and comes up to me and says, oh, we stop man-in-the-middle websites too, I'll talk to them briefly, make sure I feel confident, and that's the case, and I'll add them to the list. But there are other vendors out there, that can be, many of them, again, FIDO enabled. But you don't have to be FIDO enabled. FIDO is a really good solution, but there's other solutions out there, and I think everybody should take a look at them. Interesting way that how vendors respond. Remember, I was talking about push-based authentication, where you have all these people that are approving logins that they're not even made to. And let me say, maybe another case was, I heard there was a guy that was in charge of putting push-based authentication out to people that work on oil drills, roughnecks, as they call them. And he talked about he couldn't even deploy this push-based authentication, phone-based, push-based authentication, because many of the roughnecks either didn't have cell phones or they had flip phones, and they didn't have application ability. So they had to buy these roughnecks, new up-to-date cell phones, and then train them in how to use it to do the push-based authentication. But after he had rolled out the project, what they found out is a bunch of roughnecks had let their boss do the push-based authentication. So the roughnecks got tired of not being able to operate it correctly or operate their phones. And so the boss said, hey, just tell your authentication to go to my phone. So they reconfigured their push-based authentication to go to his email address and his phone. And the boss was just approving dozens to hundreds of these push-based authentication messages all day long for his employees. And so when it was found out, that particular manager, roughneck manager, got in trouble. And he said, listen, the IT and management said, listen, you're undermining the whole reason we went to push-based authentication, because we're trying to stop hackers from breaking in. And if you're randomly just approving every push-based authentication that comes to your phone or your email, you're undermining the advanced security of this program. And the guy said, okay. Well, they checked a month later, he was doing it again. And when they yelled at him, he's like, listen, my guys are just trying to do the job, and you're getting in the way. So sometimes education is not enough. And I want to applaud both Google and Microsoft that they're updating their push-based authentication. This is all at this time as I'm giving this talk in beta testing. And some people can turn it on, some people can't. And I heard that they're going to be turning this feature on and requiring it, although we'll see. But this new feature, when you're going to log in, if you have push-based authentication, there will be a number. You see kind of an example of it on the right there. There will be a number on the screen that the person that's approving push-based authentication has to type in. And it's kind of interesting. In the Google one, they used to have, hey, type in the number you see on your screen now, and this is probably, in a way, better. They're like, here's 3 numbers. Which one of those numbers is the right number? So the person doesn't have to type if they got greasy hands or something as much. They just hit the right number. And again, on the right-hand side, I think that's a Microsoft Authenticator where they're putting this number in. Either way, I think this is great because that oil rig roughneck manager would not be able to just simply approve everything. He would have to know the numbers on the screen. I guess he could talk to his workmen, like, what's your number? But at least he's verifying that it's them involved in the login. Unfortunately, this feature alone doesn't stop man-in-the-middle proxy attacks. So I only give kind of these types of solutions. I'm excited that they've added this feature, but I'm only giving it kind of like half approval. So what I tell people, if you want to know, is your MFA strong, just ask yourself, can your MFA beat the man-in-the-middle proxy attack test site? And if it doesn't, download the Noble 4 multi-factor authentication security assessment tool, and we'll tell you whether or not it does. But if it can't, then I don't like it. Is your MFA tied to a phone number? If it is, I don't like it. Does it send you a one-time password that you type in and that thing can be intercepted? If so, I don't like it. Not only do I not like it, the U.S. government for years has said not to use it. So it's not just me. Some people ask me about biometrics. What about biometrics? And strangely, some weird thing, everybody in the world thinks that biometrics is, it's the end-all, be-all, it's going to save us all. It's not. It can be hacked. It can be stolen. Biometrics are all right, but they're, like in that first example, it's a Windows Hello screen that's doing facial recognition. I have people that email me, it used to be every week, now it's every 2 or 3 weeks, where their toddler walks in front of their screen and logs them in as the parent. And obviously the parent and the toddler don't look anything alike, but the scanners think they do apparently. Or fingerprints can be stolen and reused, and they can be, it turns out like your fingerprint is unique in the world. The way that fingerprint scanners and retina scanners and stuff like that and facial, things work, they don't store the information is guaranteed and unique. And it's not like when I joined KnowBe4 and we had this fingerprint scanner, I was like employee 300 and my fingerprint that they scanned matched some other employee's fingerprint. And that's not unusual. Again, my fingerprint's unique in the world probably, but the way that biometric fingerprint readers read fingerprints and store them and analyze them, not unique. Your face and your eyeball and your fingerprint probably matches 10,000, if not 1 million other people in this world. And so biometrics are not super strong authentication, although they could be, but it just turns out that the way that our products work, they kind of detune them so that they're not as accurate. Also, I only believe in using biometrics if it includes like two factors. Again, if all you do is swipe or look at the screen, it logs you in and doesn't ask you for a PIN or a password, I don't like it as much. It's also easy to steal and replay these fingerprints. And that solution may or may not be phishable. A lot of times biometrics isn't phishable because you're logging into a device, and that makes it not phishable because it's not logging you into an application, it's logging you into a device, and it's not phishable. But so that's good. But it's just not nearly as accurate as it's touted, especially if it's allowed for remote logins. An attacker can, guess millions of times, and so I'm not a big fan of remote biometrics, especially 1FA. At least require a PIN or a password or something. But then again, it's fine many times. Like Windows Hello for business, it works for most people unless you're being attacked by a nation state person, or I use a fingerprint to swipe into my cell phone. It's not accurate. It's not really secure. But what's on my phone that somebody wants, and if they want it, they could just send me a simple phishing email and scam me another way, and that probably works just as well. But remember, a strong human firewall is your best last line of defense. No matter what MFA that you're using, you need to educate everybody, the buyers, the evaluators, the implementers, the users, senior management, about what MFA provides. Don't tell them, oh, this is the be-all, end-all, it's going to stop all hacking. It doesn't. You need to tell everybody involved what are the strengths and the weaknesses of different solutions, how to correctly use the solution, what is, like when to say, no, it's not me, logging in and report it to IT. You need to teach everybody about how the multi-factor authentication works, what it doesn't and does prevent. Like, hey, you still need to pay attention to and hover over URLs before you click them because this MFA solution can be fooled. You want to educate everybody involved about the common types of possible attacks that work against that MFA and how to prevent them, like hover over links and analyze them before you click them. It's all about education. Education, telling people to hover over an MFA link or educating them about their MFA solution, what works and doesn't work, is going to work better than MFA. Like if I teach you to hover over an MFA link before you click it, I'm fixing every rogue URL problem, whether or not you're using MFA or not, and that's more valuable than just using MFA. Of course, at KnowBe4, we're big believers in that everybody should get training and then simulated phishing. And we know that everybody and our customers that do monthly simulated training and phishing, it drops their phish prone rate from somewhere around a third of their employees that would click on any phishing email to somewhere around 5% a year later. And that's not our best customers. It's every customer that does education and simulated phishing on a monthly basis. With that said, I know we're running out of time. My name's Roger Grimes. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com, and I'll be glad to answer your question as quickly as I can. You can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, where I cover lots of hacking, especially MFA stuff. With that, I want to thank everybody for putting up with me for the last hour and tell you all to continue to fight the good fight.
All right. Well, I want to thank Roger for putting together a really informative presentation. As always, I know I've learned a lot. We really appreciate your time today. We also had a lot of questions come in, and we'll make sure to send all those to the KnowBe4 team for follow-up as well. And also, of course, you can reach Roger at rogerg@knowbe4.com. So as we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that prize today is Eric Kelp from Texas. Congratulations to Eric. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank KnowBe4 for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. So that concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.